What if I told you that the trade relationship between the United States and China is now a threat to your job, your grocery bills, and the tech you use every day? Well, that is what is happening right now due to the tariff war the two countries have entered.
Meanwhile, China has just imposed new tariffs on select U.S. goods. Now, this is in retaliation to 10% duties by the U.S. on all Chinese goods that came into effect last Monday.
For decades, the U.S. and China built one of the most important economic partnerships in history. Factories in China produced everything from iPhones to car parts, while American farmers and tech giants sold billions of dollars worth of goods to Chinese consumers. But now that relationship is shifting fast. The multi-billion-dollar partnership of these two giants is deeply shaken, and the collapse would have serious consequences. On the other hand, it seems President Trump is considering a closer relationship with India in a move that could counter China's influence. The Prime Minister of India recently met with President Trump and Elon Musk at the White House to solidify this relationship. This is a strategy that could have an impact on the stability of China and the BRICS bloc, as nations within the bloc may have to choose sides. But why is this happening? And what does it mean for your wallet, job, and the future of global trade? Let's break it down. But first, hit the subscribe button to support the channel. For years, the United States and China built a powerful trade partnership, shaping the global economy. At its peak in 2022, bilateral trade between the two nations reached a staggering $690 billion. That year, U.S. exports to China totaled $154 billion, while imports from China surged to $537 billion, reinforcing China's role as a major supplier of consumer goods and a crucial market for American industries. But this flourishing trade relationship took a sharp turn as tensions escalated. The first cracks appeared in 2018 when the Trump administration, aiming to address trade imbalances and intellectual property concerns, imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese imports. In response, China hit back with its own tariffs on U.S. goods, sparking a tit-for-tat economic standoff that only intensified in the years that followed. By 2024, the fallout was clear. Total trade between the two nations plummeted to $582 billion. U.S. exports to China dropped to $143 billion, while imports from China fell to $439 billion. In just 2 years, the U.S. lost $10 billion in exports, but China was hit even harder, with a staggering $100 billion decline in exports to the U.S. Both countries are on the losing end, but the way they are impacted is very different. In early 2025, President Donald Trump announced a 10% increase in tariffs on all Chinese imports, intensifying the trade dispute. China promptly countered by imposing 15% tariffs on U.S. coal and liquefied natural gas, and 10% tariffs on crude oil and agricultural machinery. These actions further strained the economic ties between the two superpowers, with both administrations adopting firm stances. President Trump justified the tariffs as necessary measures to protect American industries and reduce the trade deficit. In response, Chinese President Xi Jinping condemned the U.S. actions, asserting that China would play along to the end if the U.S. continued its efforts to suppress China's economic growth. This exchange of economic blows has not only affected bilateral trade, but also disrupted global supply chains, prompting businesses worldwide to reassess their strategies in an increasingly uncertain trade environment. But tariffs are just the tip of the iceberg. This trade war is now reshaping global supply chains, and China is not sitting back. One of the big changes is how multinational corporations have restructured their supply chains to reduce risks associated with the U.S.-China tensions. Countries such as Vietnam, Malaysia, and Singapore have emerged as alternative manufacturing hubs, benefiting from the diversification of investments. Vietnam, in particular, has experienced substantial growth in its export share to the U.S., positioning itself as a significant player in global trade. Similarly, Malaysia and Singapore have capitalized on the shift, enhancing their roles in the global supply chain network. By 2024, U.S. imports from Vietnam soared to $136.6 billion, a 19.3% jump from the previous year, deepening the trade deficit between the two nations to $123.5 billion, an 18.1% increase over 2023. On the surface, it looks like the U.S. is forging stronger trade ties with smaller Asian economies. But here's the catch. Many Chinese manufacturers are quietly shifting production to Vietnam, using it as a backdoor to bypass U.S. tariffs and rising costs. This shift is particularly explosive in the electronics sector. Vietnam's exports to the U.S. have skyrocketed, with $39 billion in electrical and electronic equipment, $11 billion in machinery, and $10 billion in furniture and lighting as early as 2022. In reality, while Vietnam benefits on paper, much of this production still has Chinese roots, complicating the trade war narrative. And it's not just Vietnam. Malaysia is also experiencing a surge in trade with the U.S. As companies redirect supply chains, U.S. goods trade with Malaysia reached an estimated $80.2 billion in 2024. U.S. exports to Malaysia jumped 43.5% to $27.7 billion, driven by rising demand for electronics, machinery, and equipment. Meanwhile, U.S. imports from Malaysia rose to $52.5 billion, a 13.7% increase over the previous year. Interestingly, despite the increase in trade, the U.S. goods trade deficit with Malaysia actually shrank by 7.6%, falling to $24.8 billion, a sign that U.S. exports are growing at a faster pace than imports. The U.S.-China trade tensions have prompted companies to adopt an anything-but-China strategy, diversifying their supply chains to countries like Malaysia. This realignment has not been without challenges. This pivot has led to intensified competition and diminished profit margins, as these markets are not as expansive as the U.S. The increased competition has resulted in price wars among Chinese firms, further squeezing profitability and leading to a potential political backlash in the host countries. But the fallout isn't just about supply chains. The trade war is also triggering a full-blown tech race, especially in semiconductors, where the U.S. is trying to cut off China's access to advanced chips. U.S. export bans on advanced computing and semiconductor technologies have compelled China to expedite the development of its domestic chip manufacturing capabilities. Companies like Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation have made notable advancements, including the production of 7-nanometer chips, despite facing significant challenges due to restricted access to U.S. technology. This progress shows China's determination to achieve technological self-reliance in critical sectors despite the trade restrictions. Meanwhile, China is also working on several strategies to hit back at the United States. The targets have been alarming. China's retaliatory strategy has prominently featured the imposition of tariffs on key U.S. exports. Beyond tariffs, several reports have highlighted that China has occasionally manipulated the export of critical commodities to leverage its dominant position in global supply chains. A case in point involves rare earth elements, which are vital minerals used in advanced electronics, renewable energy systems, and military hardware. Although China has not completely cut off rare earth exports to the United States, it has tightened regulatory controls and imposed export quotas that effectively limit supply and potentially increase costs. Such tactics show that China's control over key resources can serve as a strong bargaining chip in trade disputes. And it's not just minerals. China is also reshaping its food supply. As the world's largest soybean importer, it has dramatically cut reliance on U.S. farmers, shifting its focus to Brazil. Back in 2016, Brazil accounted for just 46% of China's soybean imports. But today, that figure has surged to 74% and continues to climb. This shift is a direct response to escalating trade tensions, with the U.S. pushing China to diversify its suppliers and secure a more stable agricultural pipeline. With vast farmland and strong government incentives, Brazil has capitalized on this opportunity, solidifying its role as China's dominant soybean source. But this isn't just about food security, it's geopolitical play. Strengthening trade ties with Latin America gives China a powerful economic ally in a region where U.S. influence has historically been strong. The energy sector tells a similar story. China has secured long-term agreements with key suppliers, effectively sidelining U.S. energy exports. One of the most significant deals is a 30-year natural gas agreement with Russia, ensuring a steady supply of energy through the Power of Siberia pipeline. In addition, China has entered a $60 billion liquefied natural gas (LNG) deal with Qatar, further solidifying its energy security, stating that it is dumping imports from the U.S.
They've said that there'll be a 15% tariff on any coal and liquefied natural gas that comes from the United States to China.
These moves strategically reduce China's reliance on American LNG, which had been growing before the U.S.-China trade war. By locking in energy sources from Russia and the Middle East, China is insulating itself from geopolitical risks that could threaten supply chains. Perhaps the most ambitious part of China's trade transformation is its investment in technology. The country's Made in China 2025 initiative is a state-led industrial policy designed to make China a leader in high-tech industries, including semiconductor manufacturing. Historically, China has depended on American technology firms for advanced chips and critical components, a vulnerability that became apparent when the U.S. imposed export restrictions on Chinese tech giants like Huawei. In response, China has poured billions into domestic semiconductor production, building its supply chains and reducing dependence on foreign technology. This effort includes government-backed firms, strategic acquisitions, and heavy investment in research and development. If successful, China could emerge as a global leader in semiconductor technology, challenging U.S. dominance in the sector. This shift in trade strategy is not just about economic diversification. It is also a geopolitical maneuver. By deepening ties with countries like Brazil, Russia, and Qatar, China is creating a more resilient economic framework that is less susceptible to U.S. influence. The question now is whether the United States will respond with countermeasures to regain its foothold, or if China's new alliances will permanently reshape global trade dynamics. Now, the big question is, who is most affected by all this? The fallout from the U.S. trade war has been felt in numerous sectors of the economy, with farmers, technology companies, and everyday consumers all experiencing significant impacts. American farmers have been among the most affected. In the heartland of Iowa and Nebraska, where agriculture forms the backbone of local economies, farm bankruptcies surged during the peak of the trade war. The loss of China as a major customer created a substantial gap in the market that these farmers had relied on for decades. Finding new buyers is not an overnight solution. It involves building new trade relationships, navigating different quality standards, and overcoming regulatory hurdles. These challenges mean that even when a new market is found, the benefits may take years, if not decades, to fully compensate for the lost revenue. The technology sector has not been spared either. Companies like Qualcomm, which have built their reputations on innovative telecommunications and semiconductor technologies, are shifting to China. This shift is more than just a temporary move. It represents a shift in the global market dynamics that have traditionally favored cross-border collaborations and supply chains. To counter these challenges, the U.S. government introduced the CHIPS Act, a significant investment in domestic semiconductor production. This initiative is designed to reduce dependence on foreign markets and safeguard the technological prowess of American companies. While China is having a difficult trading relationship with the U.S., it seems Trump's strategy is to counter this power play with a stronger partnership with India. President Donald Trump recently met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House on February 13, 2025. This visit was not just a regular diplomatic meeting. It was part of Trump's larger plan to strengthen ties with India and counter China's growing influence. The timing of the visit was also important because it happened right when Trump announced new reciprocal tariffs. These tariffs are meant to punish countries that impose high taxes on American goods, a move that affects both China and India. Trump's priorities seem to be getting India to purchase American oil and gas, as he explained during the press conference.
Number one is they're going to be purchasing a lot of our oil and gas. We have more oil and gas than any other country in the world.
During the meeting, Trump and Modi discussed several important topics, including defense, trade, and technology partnerships. One of the biggest developments was the U.S. offering to sell India advanced F-35 fighter jets. This deal would strengthen India's military and help it stand up to China in the region. Both leaders also talked about the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Quad, a partnership between the US, India, Japan, and Australia, which aims to keep the Indo-Pacific region free from China's dominance. So, is Trump using both economic pressure and military deals to bring India closer to the US and reduce China's power? This strategy seems to be a mix of rewards and penalties, offering military support while pushing India to change its trade policies. As the situation develops, the world will be watching closely to see how this impacts the balance of power in Asia. With China strengthening ties with Russia, Brazil, and the Middle East, and Trump turning to India, is this the beginning of a permanent split between the world's two biggest economies? Let us know what you think in the comments. For more updates and analysis on the global economy, subscribe to the channel and watch out for our next update. It promises to be explosive.